Then the Greeks rise to power. Alexander the Great conquers the Persian Empire around 330 BC. At Pompeii, they found this beautiful mosaic of Alexander the Great. This time of the Greeks is actually between the Old and New Testaments. There's about 400 years between the end of the Old Testament and beginning of the New Testament. And between this time, the Greeks rise to power and rule. Ptolemy II of Egypt orders a translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek called the Septuagint, which became the Bible of the early Christians. Now, it's during this time of the Greeks that many of the Dead Sea Scrolls are written. So we want to turn over here and look at the Dead Sea Scrolls. And this is probably the most important discovery. Of all these discoveries, this would be the most important one. And here we have the Great Isaiah Scroll. If I unroll all of it, it's over 24 feet long. It's the whole book of Isaiah 1,000 years earlier than what they had before. It's written on parchment, animal skin. Then they stitched it together to make the long scroll. And then they had little ink wells where you'd mix soot and animal fat together for the ink, and then the pen would be a palm branch. Just sharpen the end. Then we have the Habakkuk commentary, verses of Habakkuk, and comments that they thought they were living in the end times. And it seems like every generation thinks theirs is the end time and end of the world. And so they thought that back then in the Qumran community. Then in Cave 3 they found the Copper Scroll. On it has all sorts of hidden treasures. And where to find the treasures? People are looking all over for the treasures, but nobody's found any treasure yet. Maybe someday they will. Here we have fragments of the book of Job. Then we have the Ten Commandments. The Psalms, part of the Psalm scroll. Leviticus. And then we have two little silver scrolls that were discovered in a tomb outside Jerusalem. When they unrolled it, lo and behold, there's writing on it, and it's the Aaronic blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you. And that's our oldest text of the Bible that's been discovered so far. It's some date to about 625 BC. Another sensational find. Now what they did with these scrolls here is they would roll up the scrolls. They'd put them in sacks, tie it, stamp a seal on it, put it in these big jars, put the lids on, sealed up the lids, put them in caves and sealed up the caves. Now they did that because the Romans were coming, destroying everything, so they hid it all away from the Romans, and they did such a good job that it wasn't until 1947 a shepherd boy threw a stone in a little hole, heard something, went in and discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. They found all the books of the Old Testament, but some are just tiny little fragments. Right here is supposedly from the book of Esther, but it has only a couple letters on it. Now over here I said this is parchment, animal skin. This is how you make it. So you start off with like sheep or goat skin. This is goat skin here. You soak it in lime water. That makes the hair fall off. Then you take a big knife, scraping the hair off. Then you rinse it all off. And then you stretch it out on a big frame like I have here. This is goat skin. Tighten it all up. Then you scrape it all nice and clean. Let it dry. Then you can put some pumice on it. And then it's ready to write on. And here we have some of the different kinds of skin. Here we have calf skin. This is what the rabbis use today to write the Torah on, the first 5 books of Moses. Then we've got sheep skin, goat skin, deer skin. And if you want to buy a Torah on calf skin handwritten, the cheapest one I could find was $30,000. So it's very, very expensive, but it's handwritten on calf skin. Then we're still between the Testaments, the famous Rosetta Stone, discovered by Napoleon's army in 1799, written in Greek, Demotic, Egyptian hieroglyphics. Champollion knew the Greek and was able to figure out the hieroglyphics, and they're celebrating a tax break. Then we have the famous Cleopatra, her handwriting down there. Then we have an early synagogue inscription. The Jews start building synagogues between the testaments to worship at. Then in 167 BC, there's the Maccabean revolt, where the Jews gain their freedom and they celebrate it with Hanukkah even today around Christmas time. Then the Romans rise to power. They conquered Jerusalem in 63 BC, and now the Romans are in power. They wrote in Latin. You might be able to figure this out. It says P-I-L-A-T. This is Pilate, prefect of Judea, the end of Pontius here. This was a sensational find. Before this discovery, people were thinking, oh, Pilate's just a made-up person, until they discovered this in 1961 at Caesarea. Recently, they found a little ring that has the name Pilate on it in Greek. They don't think Pilate wore it, but maybe one of his officials to stamp documents for him. Then we have the widow's mite. And then the 30 pieces of silver given to Judas would be 30 of the shekel of Tyre that they would use in the temple, because it was 99% pure silver, where other coins might be mixtures. And then you have the money changers who want their cut of the money for an exchange. Now the Romans would practice with wooden swords so no one would get hurt. But when it came time for battle, you got to bring out the real thing here. This is called a Gladius, a short sword for close combat. Then you have the shield, the helmet, and then the centurion, he's like the captain, would have a plume on the top of his helmet, so you know he's the guy that's in charge. Then up here we have the spear. Jesus' side was pierced with a spear. According to legend, the centurion Longinus took his spear. This is the point, so there'd be a big long shaft, and stabbed him with this spear point. There wouldn't have been any gold, something to nail the cross in there. Of course, this is just legend, and this is called the Spear of Destiny. And supposedly, if you had the Spear of Destiny, you were invincible. And it's in the last movie of Indiana Jones there at the beginning. Then we have here a full-size replica of the Shroud of Turin. Many believe this is the burial cloth of Jesus. You see the crossed hands here with the nail print in the hands. Then we have the face right here. And then when they took a picture of it, the negative, the face really stands out. Then this is the front. Then this is the back. This has whippings on the back with a whip, something like that. And it went through a fire, and they had to put patches on it to hold it together. There's a lot of debate about this. Some think this is real. Others say, no, this is a forgery. It's been carbon dated to the 13th century. So there's a lot of debate back and forth. But most scholars think this is just a forgery. Then we want to turn to this side over here. These are the oldest fragments and text of the New Testament. The Dead Sea Scrolls is all Old Testament. And right up here, P52 is our oldest fragment of the New Testament, Gospel of John, chapter 18. Then we have our oldest fragment of the Gospel of Mark. We've got the Gospel of Luke, Gospel of Matthew, P1. The P stands for papyrus. This is all papyrus paper, not animal skin, made from the papyrus plant that grows in the Nile Delta. They slice up the stem into strips like I have here, And you lay the strips down one way, you lay them down the opposite way, and then you pound it all out, let it dry, and you have your papyrus paper to write on. And our word paper comes from the word papyrus. And the Apostle Paul would be writing his letters on papyrus paper. Now, the early Christians started making books instead of scrolls. The Jews were making scrolls, and now the Christians started making books like this. They would write on both sides of the papyrus. It was expensive. Then they tied it off in the middle with leather, put leather around old papyrus to give it a backing and a covering. And this is your early Gospel of John, P66. So they would, when they discover it, they would mark down the P for papyrus and then the letter or the number in which order they were marking it down. So this was number 66. And then I showed you P1 is the Gospel of Matthew, the first one they marked down. And these mainly are from Oxyrhynchus, which is a very famous site for discovering many of these papyrus fragments. And Oxyrhynchus was a major Christian city in Egypt back then. Now, when Constantine became emperor, he was the first Christian Roman emperor, and he ordered 50 Bibles to be made. So some think this is when they brought all the books together to form the Bible like we have today. And we have our 4 oldest Bibles here. We've got Codex Alexandrinus, Codex Vaticanus, Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus. Now, Codex Alexandrinus here was given to King Charles I of England. It was given to King James, but he died before he got it. And so it was given to King Charles for King James helping them out. And of course it says Codex Alexandrinus, so it was coming from Alexandria, that was from Alexandrian Egypt. And it dates to about the 5th century. And it was put in the royal library, but then later on a fire broke out in the royal library. And the librarian's dilemma was, what book should he save from the fire? And he picked Codex Alexandrinus. And most people think he made the right choice. Codex Vaticanus is our oldest, most accurate New Testament. The only problem is it ends at Hebrews 9:14, and the rest of the pages are missing. And it's called Vaticanus because it's in the Vatican. Ephraemi Rescriptus is called a palimpsest. A palimpsest is when you erase what was on there, write over it. So they put this blue chemical all over it to bring out what was erased. And what was erased is one of our oldest Bibles. Now, the oldest Bible with the complete New Testament is Codex Sinaiticus, found at Mount Sinai. Tischendorf went there and was horrified the monks had burned some of the pages. He was able to rescue the complete New Testament, but only about half the Old Testament. Of course, the monks have a completely different story. They'd never do that. Then we have the Leningrad Codex. It's our oldest complete Hebrew Bible. That dates to about 108 AD. So when scholars translate the Bible today, they mainly use the Leningrad Codex for the Old Testament, and for the New Testament, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. Now, in 1945, in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, they found a bunch of heretical Gnostic Gospels. The most famous here is the Gospel of Thomas. It has 114 sayings of Jesus, and scholars debate back and forth if some of those are original or not. And just recently they found a little fragment that had Matthew, Saint of Matthew, Luke, and Gospel of Thomas on it. Then way at the bottom here, in 1886 they discovered this coffin in Egypt with this monk in it clutching one of these Gospels, and that made sensational news. And it was the Gospel of Peter. And that made sensational news. Then up here we have the Arch of Titus. Titus destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. Before he did, he took the temple treasures. Here you see the menorah that was in the temple. 2 silver trumpets, like the trumpet up here, for sounding the feasts. Then we have the table of showbread, and took it all back to Rome, where we think with all the Jewish slaves and money from the temple helped build the Roman Colosseum that you can still see today. Then finally we come to the book of Revelation. And here we have the 7 churches of Revelation. They're all in Asia Minor, which would be modern day Turkey. And then we have a model of New Jerusalem. It has 12 different foundation stones. Here you can see what the original stones look like, and all different colors. And then we have the 12 gates with the 12 pearls and the river of life. And it's all, the size is all cube in form. And that takes us through the book of Revelation.